Hey guys, welcome to Literarily Wendy. My name is Wendy, and today I'm going to be reviewing Ducks Newburyport by Lucy Ellmann. Lucy Ellmann was born in the United States and then she moved to England as a teenager. Her parents were both writers. Her father, Richard Ellmann, was a literary critic and biographer, who famously wrote the definitive biography on the one and only James Joyce. Her mother, Mary Ellmann, was also a literary critic, and she wrote essays on feminist theory. The events of Ducks Newburyport take place in 2017, and then the book was published in 2019, where it was shortlisted for the 2019 Booker Prize. A fascinating thing about this book is that her normal publisher, Bloomsbury, actually passed on publishing Ducks Newburyport. Luckily, Galley Beggar Press published it, and it was later republished by the Canadian indie publisher Biblioasis. I will note that Biblioasis does send me free advance copies of books. However, Ducks Newburyport I purchased on my own. I am so excited to talk about this book today. If you were to ask me what my favorite books of all time are, this would for sure be one of them. It would be near the top of the list. My reading experience with this book was some of the most fun I've ever had reading a book, especially a long book like this one. Lucy has said that she wanted to trace someone's thought patterns, and she doesn't think that thinking is punctuated in the brain. So for that reason, Ducks Newburyport is one long continuous sentence that is interrupted every 100 pages or so by this recurring motif of a mountain lioness and her cubs. I'll speak more on my thoughts on this second narrative a little bit later. This book is over 1,000 pages of stream of consciousness writing, much of it without any page breaks, paragraph breaks, and without a full stop in the main text. There are commas and semicolons, but no full stops outside of the second narrative with the mountain lions. The narrator is a middle-aged mother of four from Ohio. She's married to a man named Leo, who she adores, but his work keeps him away from home a lot, and so she spends a lot of her time alone. We learn that she used to be a teacher, but she retired after some health complications, and now she bakes pies from home and she sells them to local shops and restaurants. So one of the main things that throws people off of this book is the size of it. It is over 1,000 pages. I believe this edition is 1,020 pages, which scares a lot of people away, understandably. So the book is large, but in my opinion, it has to be. It is trying to encapsulate the entire consciousness of a single person who is taking in and interpreting and existing within a society that is so complex, more complex than our human brains have evolved to comprehend, really. So we, the reader, witness this steady stream of stimuli being processed by this one mother in Ohio as she just goes about her regular day and the events of her life. Throughout the text, she spends a lot of time analyzing her life. She ruminates, she worries about current events, she processes her past trauma, she ponders politics, gets little tunes stuck in her head. And all of this is kind of punctuated with three words: the fact that, which breaks up her thoughts. I'll read you a little excerpt from it now so that you can get an idea of what reading this book is like. So this is from a scene where she gets stuck in the snow while driving to deliver her pies to a restaurant. The fact that I'm starting to ache and shake all over. Frostbite, exposure. The fact that all I can think about are those 3-day blizzards in the long winter. 7 months of blizzards and frozen nails in the ceiling. And Pa hiding in a snow hole. The fact that my teeth hurt, but that's probably the hygienist, not the cold. The fact that she probably ruined me for life with that newfangled machine of hers. The fact that I don't think she knows how to work it right. And there goes another one, a car, not a hygienist, and it looks pretty comfortable too. The fact that I'm going to need some comfort if I ever get myself out of this mess, predicament. The fact that that's hard to say when your face is frozen. Predicament, predicament. So that's just a little bit of a sample of what it's like to read through this book. It becomes very meditative. It becomes the fact that almost becomes like a mantra throughout the book. Most of the book looks like this. There's not a lot of white space. There's not a lot of page breaks. There are the occasional sections where there are these lists. Sometimes it's a shopping list, sometimes it's just a list of topics that have been on her mind. When I first read this book, it was, I think, in the summer of 2022. I started it, and it was a little bit slow going at first. I was in a group read with approximately 10 other people, and very quickly a lot of them started to drop out of the reading group until just a few of us remained and finished the book. It got kind of meditative as I was going, and at some point I just sort of let go and let Lucy just take me for a ride. Initially, when I finished this book, I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, but as I sat with the book for about a week or so afterwards, I did upgrade it to 5 stars, and I'll explain why. Initially, Initially, I rated it 4 stars because by the end of the book, I felt like a lot of it was just exhausting. The first about 75% of the book is a lot of the same. Like you're going through her thoughts, you're following her along in her day, you're just kind of along for the ride. You're listening to what she's saying internally. You're getting to know her as a character. You're kind of understanding her life, her kids. She's got 4 children. She's got a husband. She makes pies. She sells pies. She seems like just your average middle-aged housewife. But it does get exhausting. That's why I think this book loses a lot of people, is that it is very repetitive. It's a lot of just mundane thoughts. Mundane but meditative, I would say, because as you start going, it's like it almost just pulls you through the book. I found myself sitting there and just like crushing 100 pages in a day, which is a lot for me. And I think that's just because a lot of her thoughts are just so similar to my own sometimes. You can tell she's got a lot of anxiety. She thinks a lot about the safety of her children. She thinks a lot about the state of the planet, the state of her community, the state of her country. Initially, I didn't think that the length of the book was necessary. I ended up changing my mind on that. I have looked online to see if I could find much about what Lucy has said about this book, and I haven't been able to find much. So I believe she probably just wants us to interpret it on our own. So my experience with the book after the fact was I started to think about the exhaustion aspect of it, you know? You're in someone's thoughts, you're getting exhausted by a lot of repetition and paranoia. She's often worried about her children. She's often thinking about her husband, processing her past. Her mom died when she was young. But what made me eventually change my mind and give it 5 stars is that I actually think that that feeling of exhaustion was intentional by Lucy. I think she wanted us to feel like an Ohio housewife. I think that she wanted us to experience that exhaustion as it relates to having these kinds of thoughts all day, every day. If it's this exhausting for the reader, imagine how exhausting it is for the character having those thoughts going through her mind 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that got me thinking about my own thought processes and how exhausted I feel by my own thoughts a lot of the time. And this book is so real for that, because who isn't exhausted by their own thoughts? You know, you sit up late at night, you're worried about things. As you go through your day, you're, obsessively thinking about certain topics that have happened in your life, going back to previous memories, processing them again. So I do believe that that feeling of exhaustion was an intentional part of the book. And I think that that is why I disagree when people say that this book should have been shorter. I don't think it would have worked as a shorter book. It kind of reminded me of Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace, and how because of the endnotes you're going back and forth in the book, and many have said that that is because he wanted it to feel like a tennis match, right? Where you're looking back and forth. And I think that that same kind of logic can be applied to Ducks Newburyport. Without that length, without that exhausted feeling, part of the intention of the book might have been missed. I think that a lot of the thoughts of the character in this book does perfectly capture the ennui of our time, in that we are almost sleepwalking through the horrors of existence. You know, you've got violence in schools, impending climate catastrophe, late-stage capitalism, and all the while we're all expected to carry on business as usual, just baking our pies. So the repetition, the paranoia, all the lists, the mundane, everyday static of life, and the lack of full stops really is kind of symbolic of not only the way our thoughts work. Thoughts are always entering our head without us even realizing it a lot of the time, but also that's how life is. Like, we don't really get a break a lot of the time. There's just things happening constantly that we have to worry about, that we're having to process all the time. And this brings me into the mountain lion parts of this book, because they're so different. While the bulk of the main narrative is ongoing, one sentence, no full stops, no punctuation, no paragraphs, the mountain lion sections do have traditional punctuation, a different narrator with traditional style, traditional punctuation. The thoughts of the mother lioness are short, they're to the point, they're simpler, they're in the moment, which I kind of interpreted as sort of an intentional juxtaposition between the simplicity of nature and the animals who live in it, and this sort of complicated cacophony of a world that humans have created that has our thoughts fractured and scattered throughout our day. We're either ruminating on the past or catastrophizing the future, and we're very rarely in the moment. At first, the mountain lion sections seem a bit random, but they do end up synchronizing pretty well with the events in the main narrative. The narrator also makes references to lions in the main text. Hell, the husband's name is Leo, which is from a Greek word that means lion. To further push that synchronicity, the mother lioness in the second narrative has 3 cubs. And if you remember, the narrator in the main story has 4 children, but actually only 3 of those are from her relationship with Leo. And I found that a big theme in this book was motherhood and that feeling of fear we have about keeping our children safe. And I think that the mother lioness sections kind of really accurately mirror the feeling of bringing a child into this world, teaching them how to survive, how to hide from danger, and then at some point, that child is kind of claimed by society. They leave the nest, so to speak. They move further away from you as they grow up. I wanted to touch on what might be a little bit of a conspiracy theory that I have about Leo in this book. Throughout the text, the narrator talks about how wonderful he is, how she loves him so much. She had previous relationships in which she wasn't really treated very well. So Leo as a character at first glance comes across as being this like wonderful, loving husband and great father. However, the narrator does talk about him being mostly absent because of his job. So he's traveling a lot, he's not home a lot, she's left alone a lot. And given the synchronicity between the main narrative and the Mother Lioness side story, I think we can look at the Mother Lioness story for clues to interpret the main storyline as well. So early on in the Mother Lioness storyline, the lioness expresses that the male lion, the father of her cubs, is dangerous, and she spends a lot of energy trying to protect her cubs from him. And in the main storyline, there are some events that happen near the end of the book that really kind of bring everything together in a really satisfying way. And without giving too much away, there is an event that occurs in which I don't think that Leo reacts in a way that I would expect him to react. His reaction doesn't really seem to match the seriousness of the situation. And I could be reading too much into it, but that makes me wonder if he perhaps isn't the perfect, innocent gentleman that the narrator believes him to be. So yes, this is a very long book. It's a challenging read. It takes a long time to get through. This book was basically my life for like at least a month or more. And I just found it so interesting. It was such a unique reading experience for me. I think this book is so wonderful. I had so much fun reading this book. I still think about this book a lot and I recommend it to people all the time. It's such a cool read. And like when you finish this book, you really feel like you accomplished something. After reading this, I took a deep dive and I read some other Lucy Ellmann books as well. And I loved them too. I just think she's so brilliant. And I think that this book gets a lot of crap. A lot of people give up on this book and that's fine. You know, you do you, whatever you like to read, that's what you should read. But I've never before seen a book explore the mind of a woman, and especially a mother, to the depth that this book does. It's a truly beautiful experience reading this book. So if you're looking for a book that's a little bit different from what you're normally reading, something that's a little bit experimental, then I highly recommend you get yourself a copy of this one. It's the kind of book that when you finish it, you think about it, and the more you think about it, the more kind of connections you make. I highly recommend reading Ducks Newburyport by Lucy Ellmann. If you like long books, if you like stream of consciousness novels, you'll probably really like this book. I want to hear from you down in the comments. Let me know if you've read Ducks Newburyport. Let me know what you thought of it, what you got out of it. And if you haven't read Ducks Newburyport, let me know what's a long book that you've read that you found really challenging but enjoyable. I think that's all I have to say about this book today. Thanks so much for watching. Please hit subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Boop. I feel like a book lumberjack. Canada will deport you if you don't have this red flannel. High five. What's going on right now in the world?